Hey guys, in today's video, we'll go over how to install Glazing Bead into our Flex series. There are two different profiles of Glazing Bead. There's Stud Bead, which will install onto the Flex studs and the Genesis studs and run both vertically and horizontally. The other profile is the Track Bead. The Track Bead is designed to go into the Flex track. The Glazing Bead is designed to accept either single pane glass or double pane glass. The Glazing Bead will also accept 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch glass. To determine the configuration of the bead, I'll put up a chart so you can see what the different options are. To know what your project calls for, take a look at the description page on the paperwork sent with the material. On the description page, it'll have the thickness of glass as well as whether it is single pane or double pane. The glazing bead will only be installed where you have glass panels. We'll now go over how to measure for your track bead and your stud bead. When measuring and installing the glazing bead, we typically start with the horizontal glazing bead first. This will apply to both the track bead and the stud bead if you have stud bead running horizontally. The measuring points will be the same regardless of the glazing bead being used. To measure for the width of the glazing bead, measure from the inside point of the flex stud over to the same point on the opposite side flex stud. We want a nice tight fit between the vertical flex studs. In this case, I'll be measuring for track bead. To install the track bead, place the track bead in the center of the flex track. Once the track bead is inside the flex track, press down on the track bead to snap it into the flex track. If needed, use a rubber mallet to strike the track bead to make sure it's installed properly. Once installed, you should have a nice tight fit in between the flex studs. If there's a slight gap between the track bead and the flex stud, that's not a big deal, as long as the gap's not large enough so that when the stud bead is installed, it doesn't fall in behind the track bead. This same installation concept can be used when installing horizontal stud bead. I've went ahead and installed the track bead into the ceiling track. I can now measure for the vertical stud bead for the opening. To measure for the vertical stud bead, measure from horizontal glazing bead to horizontal glazing bead and add 1/8 of an inch. Adding the 1/8 of an inch will create a tight fit between the horizontal bead and the vertical stud bead. There will be situations where the stud bead will be too short and the 1/8 inch cannot be added. In those cases, make sure you cut the stud bead so it fits tight between the horizontal glazing bead. In this situation, I'll be measuring for my vertical stud bead between my track bead and the floor and the ceiling. Take measurements at each vertical stud bead location. To install the vertical stud bead, place the stud bead at the bottom of the stud and flex the top into place. You'll notice by adding the 1/8 of an inch, there'll be a bow in the stud bead. When we attach the stud bead to the flex stud, it will compress between the horizontal glazing bead. To attach the stud bead to the stud, use your rubber mallet and strike the center of the stud bead. I'll start at the top, go to the bottom, and move my way up to the center. Once installed, there will be a nice tight fit between the stud bead and the flex stud. I'll now install this side of the opening. Installed, you'll have a nice tight fit between the vertical stud bead and the horizontal glazing bead. The installation example we used in this video was for an opening receiving full height glass. The other situations you'll run into are a clear story where you'll have track bead in the track, stud bead running horizontally, and your vertical stud bead. You could have studs surrounding the entire opening where you'll have horizontal stud bead as well as vertical stud bead. Or you'll have an opening where there'll be a piece of glass running from the floor to a horizontal stud, in which you'll have track bead in the track, stud bead running horizontally, then your vertical stud bead. Regardless of the situation, how the glazing bead is measured for will be the same as discussed throughout this video. With the glazing bead installed, the glass measurements can now be taken per our glass measure guide for our Flex series. This will conclude the video. If you have any questions, please contact our office.